Rogal Dorn was ever the Emperor's will made manifest, not a maniacal devotee of a god, nor a self-glorifying servant of a conqueror, but an extension of the Emperor's brutal fist. When he acted, he served only the Emperor's purpose. He was the bulwark and the bastion, the duty and the determined. Where his brothers served with flair and freedom, improvising and altering their orders to better suit their own ideas of the Emperor's decrees, Rogal stood firm, unwavering in service and loyalty to his lord and father. Join me now as we discover how far Rogal was willing to go to serve the Emperor, to a place occluded from the light of the Astronomicon, to a place where unseen eyes attacked from the darkness, to a campaign of carnage, brutality, and utter destruction. Let us now speak of Rogal Dorn and the Night Crusade. Welcome one and all, I am Azazel, and for better or worse you have stumbled your way upon my entry on Rogal Dorn and the Night Crusade. Most of the details and story herein are taken from the book Rogal Dorn, the Emperor's Crusader, so if you've not read it yet, there's your spoiler warning. And if you like this entry, do drop a like, comment and or a subscribe. Send this to friends, as with every subscriber milestone, I'll be doing giveaways, so do stay tuned for them. With that said, be prepared now. Steel your hearts and gird your minds as we enter the most horrific place imaginable. The place where hope goes to die, and where thirsting gods rack the souls of billions, while directing madness on the stage of our galaxy as easily as puppeteers pull on strings. Welcome to the 31st Millennium. The Great Crusade is well underway. The armies of humanity spill forth from the light of terror. The torchbearers of the Emperor's imperial truth, banishing the shadows of old night, and liberating lost human worlds from the shackles of insidious alien empires. His sons, the Primarchs, are found one by one, each a masterpiece of genetic engineering, given command of their gene sons, the Space Marines, and sent out to lead expeditionary fleets across the innumerable stars across the galaxy. Yet, as with every endeavor, there are complications. Worlds bearing formidable forgotten technologies, alien races whose powers defy comprehension, and of course, the warp. The other realm that humanity depends upon for faster-than-light travel. It, like many oceans, possesses its own phenomena. Thus, lay an expanse of stars in the shadow of a warp event known as the Northern Major Warp Storm. Thousands of systems across thousands of light years that were cut off from the light of the Astronomicon. The Occluda Noctis, the Night Zone. 4 expeditionary fleets, each with manpower and firepower enough to bring worlds to compliance and to decimate enemy armies, had been lost within this darkness within the span of a decade. No contact, no distress signals, simply vanished. Yet humanity did not shy away from the darkness, would not be held back by fear, not with the enlightenment and survival of the species at stake. The Emperor's will was absolute, his vision clear, a united humanity, free from the depredations of old night. Thus did he dispatch not just 1, but 4 of his sons to bring a new dawn to this zone of night. Horus of the Lunar Wolves, Fulgrim of the Emperor's Children, Lion L. Johnson of the Dark Angels, and Rogal Dorn of the Imperial Fists. At the edge of the Occluda Noctis, they brought compliance to a world named Scavia, a system of importance to be used as a staging ground for the push within the Night Zone It was a bloody war that cost them dearly. Tensions between brothers flared as they fought enormous tanks driven by abominable intelligences. Red and orange combat-suited warriors gazed out from behind golden visors, making the Astartes pay in blood for each foot of ground gained along Scathia's triangular architecture. Yet the result was never in doubt. There was no standing against the might of the Emperor's armies, less so against one led by multiple sons of the Emperor. It was on Scavia that the Primarchs discussed their plans for the coming crusade. The Lion wished to move his forces along the northwest, skirting the edge of the zone, putting his forces considerably closer to his homeworld of Caliban while doing so. Fulgrim desired a spiraling advance inwards. Dorn saw only the flaws in their plans. Some unseen force had annihilated expeditionary fleets within the region. Until the threat was identified and removed, each planet brought to compliance in their wake would be under threat. They could not afford to garrison each world they took on the outskirts of the Night Zone. Remove this hidden foe were the Emperor's orders, not to garner a greater measure of glory by taking the route of least resistance. Dorn, ever as straight as an arrow and blunt as a stone, demanded a push into the darkness, into the unknown horrors that awaited them. Horus, the first amongst equals, most loved and respected by his brothers, offered the diplomatic solution, which, in reality, was not a solution at all. A proud display of nothingness, showmanship of no real substance, the true display of a politician hard at work. He suggested to follow all the plans, for the Lion and Fulgrim to do as they wished, while Dorn ploughed onwards into the darkness, into the brunt of the unknown region of the Occluda Noctis. Short, halting jumps, a limping march ahead to maintain cohesion through the darkness, while smaller reconnaissance fleets investigated nearby systems. Worlds were found, many worlds, most of which were devoid of sentient life. Wilderness worlds with the potential for settlement at later dates. Much can be said about the Great Crusade during this time. The wars and battles won against alien oppressors, and even against unwilling human civilizations that refused to renounce their sovereignty and bend the knee to the Emperor's armies. Yet truth be told, the majority of the Great Crusade compliances occurred peacefully, with diplomacy, grace, and celebrations. Such was Rogal Dorn's first contact within the Occluda Noctis, an empire known as Catafiefdom, a small, dwindling empire whose control reigned over a mere 3 systems. They were overjoyed. Their cousin brethren had returned to them from the birthplace of the species. With them came technologies and resources, the chance to be part of something greater. Within this remote wilderness of space, this lost empire of humanity had felt themselves near alone in the galaxy, save for another empire that they knew of and hated. The Catafiefdom spoke of the Damarine, another human empire relatively close in galactic terms that had committed a deep and terrible betrayal. With this knowledge in mind, Rogal Dorn and the expeditionary fleets pushed onwards. The first contact with the Damarine was not nearly as fortuitous as with the Catafiefdom. Breaking warp within the first of the Damarine systems, the first contact fleet opened hails with the Damarine. They responded with silence and violence. The Damarine immediately launched attack waves of polyships to destroy the interlopers. Small crews within a command vessel surrounded by networked attack ships that not only bore incredible firepower, but would be sacrificed to spare the command vessel itself. They were small, agile, and deadly. While the first contact fleet retreated from the system to make their report, the polyships accounted for the loss of 2 frigates and 3 destroyer-mass vessels in their first engagement. Yet the Imperial Fists do not shy away from an enemy. The phalanx and the main fleet roared into the system, scattering the Damarine fleet. 3 Damarine vessels broke for a translation point at the edge of the system, clearly running to report to their homeworld about this new enemy. Dorn, the strategist, the master planner and thinker, could not let this happen. The Damarine were on their home ground. Dorn held not merely the element of strength, but also surprise. To waste this gift was not an option. In council with Eswin the Gigantis, novator of House Zuma, they concocted a plan, ingenious in its simplicity. Multiple vessels, including the phalanx, would translate into the warp at the earliest juncture, wait for the effects of the warp wash to fade, and study the trajectory of the Damarine ships. It worked like a charm. Following the Damarine ships in this manner, they found their destination, and then, with overwhelming power, brought the 6 Damarine worlds into compliance. With bloodshed and intimidation, the survivors of the ruling council were brought in line. And so it continued. One by one, lost empires were reclaimed. Many, such as the Triumvirate of Gaul, welcomed the Imperium of Man to this dark sector in the galaxy. Each civilization brought to heel bore new knowledge of star systems and charts, mapping out the Occluda Noctis piece by piece. News came from Dorn's brothers. Perturabo, another Primarch, had finally been discovered abroad amongst the galaxy. And in addition to this, Horus called a conclave, that they might meet once more and reevaluate the campaign's progress. Savants of war, generals of armies, masters of physical and intellectual prowess. Yet, at the end of the day, the Primarchs were brothers. Too often, they did as brothers are wont to do. Bickering and rivalry were ever the theme of many a gathering such as this one. Horus, Fulgrim, and the Lion had all committed to their own campaigns, and all had the battle honours to go along with them. Their lists of victories and compliances vastly outnumbered Dorn's own. The Dark Angels alone had near twice as many compliances as the Imperial Fists. This, the Lion noted emphatically, was a clear sign of strategic superiority. That Dorn's flawed approach was, whilst not a failure, surely much less effective than his own. The fact that he and his fleets constantly received support and reinforcements from nearby Caliban, and that his crusade warpath followed the path of least resistance, seemed not to penetrate the Lion's mind during this conclave. It was clearly overly padded in ego and arrogance. Dorn, stoicism and duty ever his virtues, responded with perfection. That victory is secured when a fortress has fallen, not by merely surrounding it. That the Emperor commanded them to bring light to the darkness of the Occluda Noctis, not to merely retrace previously explored routes by expeditionary fleets. Who really penetrated furthest into the Night Zone? The Lion, like his brothers, merely reinterpreted the Emperor's orders to fit their own strategies. Safe to say that when the conclave concluded, it did not end well. The Lion, incensed by Rogal's words, had demanded a duel of honor between the legions. That of Aeolus of the Templars and Barzarion of the Dark Angels, the Guard Bane. The Lion left, satisfied in his champion's victory. Dorn, however, saw it as no failure. His duty was to the Emperor, and to the Great Crusade, damaged honor was nothing. Perhaps even a goad to strengthen his warriors as they turned this loss into fuel for greater training regimes. And so they progressed, ever onwards into the darkness of the Occluda Noctis. Their greatest enemy was yet to be revealed. 500 systems around the edge of the Night Zone had been brought into the Emperor's light. Illumination surrounded the Occluda Noctis. However, the Imperial Fists had been responsible for barely 100 of those. Yet more so than any of his brothers, Rogal Dorn had penetrated deeper and further than any other. System by system, carefully, methodically, ever watchful, ever wary of the enemy that may lie within. There in the darkness, ghosts appeared in the warp, phantasms of ships that could barely be perceived, flickers of wraith-like fleets like movement beneath oil. An anomaly? Or their unseen enemy in an insubstantial presence? Perhaps the deadly reason that 4 expeditionary fleets had vanished without a trace. It wouldn't be long before they struck. A task force from one of the Nightbreak fleets was lost, all hands gone without a trace. Radio silence from 3 capital ships and 6 escorts. The Phalanx roared into the system in question, ready to bring the fight to this new enemy. 2 capital-class ships faced the Phalanx and began to battle. In a quick thinking strategy, Dorn ordered the Phalanx to target and destroy one of these ships. He and his Huskars would board the other, disable their systems, and take prisoners for interrogation. A chance to learn about this new foe. And yet he underestimated their cunning. For in the moments it took for Dorn and his men to incapacitate the bridge crew, the remaining enemy programmed their ship on a collision course for the Phalanx. Only by the scantest of moments did they teleport back aboard the Phalanx before the enemy ship was destroyed, lest it cause catastrophic damage to the Star Fort. So began the siege of the unseen enemy, the truest trial of the Occluda Noctis. System to system, these ghosts in the warp appeared like formless mists beneath the surface. Across a frontier, over 2,000 light years across, these intelligent, ferociously cunning ships fought, fled, and were set aflame. The Unseen, they were dubbed, named as such for their seemingly incorporeal movements through the Empyrean. Yet this name would be more suitable than originally thought, as they gained a clearer understanding of the Unseen's capabilities. Fafnir Ran fought them during the defences of a ship, as the Unseen let loose haywire grenades and concealed themselves within light-bending fields that rendered them nigh invisible, their only detectable presence that of hazes of light and lens flare. Sigismund fought them viciously planet-side, using every ounce of skill, fortitude, and instinct to slay the invisible enemies. Yet on both occasions, the Unseen proved one thing. They were as cunning as they were technologically advanced. For the Unseen did not wish to engage Marines. The killing power of an Astartes is a brutal, undeniable foe. And so they engaged in misdirection, ambush, and intelligence. The Unseen's goal was the capture of crew and ships, to waste the Imperial Fists' strength in arenas of battle where they wished them to be, and to strike at the heart of each Night Fleet's command. As tricky as an Eldar, and as slippy as Erebus. They could appear within systems with speed that defied logic. Beyond that, their ships often appeared far inside a system's Mandeville point. Their true capabilities were unknown, their technologies, motivations, and genesis a complete mystery, which grew only stranger after the first captives were taken. Four of the unseen enemy were captured alive. They sat in their cell. Humans, of course, as humanity's original colonization of the galaxy had spread the race far and wide. Yet they were unassuming. No outward signs of genetic or cybernetic enhancement. Nothing to belie their cunning and ability in the theatre of war. From their lips came only one insistence. The Imperium had declared war on the Capiculu continuum. Leave these stars, or suffer the same consequences as the ones before. Words would change nothing. These prisoners were adamant of spirit and utterly loyal to their empire. There would be only one way to garner the secrets Rogal Dorn required. With that, Librarian Hortain Thule prepared his psychic ability to delve into the consciousness of a single prisoner. A golden light glimmered from his outstretched hand, and Thule reached out with his will, yet at the moment of contact the prisoner collapsed. Instantaneous death. Massive brain hemorrhaging and cardiac arrest halted the psychic interrogation ere it had begun. What was this conundrum? What did it mean for the Capiculu continuum? Were they psychically weak by some odd quirk, or was it a designed reaction? Was the result deliberate or merely a byproduct of another goal? Did whatever caused this aid in the Unseen's unusually swift methods of interstellar travel, or was it merely a method to prevent prisoners from spilling the secrets of this hidden empire? But, more than anything else, in this age of militarization, imperialism, and bloodshed, could its effects be weaponized? The war escalated to new, feverish heights. The Unseen were everywhere and nowhere. Strikes from the shadows bled Dawn's smaller fleets before retreating into the darkness. Fighting the Unseen was like caging shadows. One required planning and forethought, benefits usually reserved for the defending side in any war. Although, Dawn's forces were not overwhelmed by any means. Supply stations were tracked down and raided, depots of unseen technologies and outposts in space were located and destroyed. Yet, all of these were well within the Mandeville points of systems. No source of travel by the unseen fleets discernible, and not a single planet of the unseen yet taken. It was then that a new theory arose, one that was nigh unheard of, that existed only in the myths and legends of old Night, but one that may explain the impossibilities of the Unseen's ways of war. A warp gate, a theoretical tale with no proof existing in the time of the Great Crusade, all knowledge surrounding them lost to the pyres of redacted histories, and the cataclysmic culmination of the Dark Age of technology. They were, in effect, artificial entrances and exits to the warp through carved-out routes. If the warp was like a river, these gates formed canals through which the Unseen could travel safely and quickly between their systems. They had been the ghosts in the warp this entire time, forever there, just a little below the surface. Stargates, if you will, but with a little extra Warhammer involved. It would take time, it would take cunning, yet there are few among even the Primarchs who possess the intellect and visualization skills such as Rogal Dorn. For his mind could cogitate not merely the dimensions of physical defenses, but the various theoretical stratagems and psychological effects of a cascading pile of actions. Piece by piece, Like petals unfolding from a flower, he maneuvered his way towards victory. Rogal Dorn took a system he highly suspected contained one of these warp gates. If suspected can indeed apply in this situation. For, as previously stated, with his cognizance, such theories could well be considered as facts not yet proven. Here would the enemy reveal themselves, for this system had served as a conduit across the war effort. If a gate did exist here, it would be a vital one, and thus a system ripe for retaliation from the unseen. Unbeknownst to all but a few, a tiny craft set itself free from the phalanx and drifted towards the suspected warp gate's location. Engines powered down, the librarian Thor and navigator Gigantes worked in concert, each straining with their extra-normal warp senses as they floated, a dark speck among the infinite blackness. The librarian Thor, clad in tactical dreadnought armour, felt it first, a hissing in his head, like a trickle of wind over dunes of sand, subtle compared to Imperial warp transit, alike and yet different, altered. The navigator Gigantes felt it next, an unseen vibration, like prey trapped upon a silken spiderweb, a tickle at the edge of thought, feeling yet no sight. By themselves, they could not fathom this technology. However, by working together, they may yet achieve their goals. Thor cast out his senses into the navigator's mind, in an attempt to forge a link between the two of them and combine their gifts in new ways as they stared out into the void together. There they felt the unseen presence, or rather their unpresence. It was akin to a cold pool among steam, their peculiar psychic imprint upon the warp. They were there, not yet in real space, but just beyond the veil, the other side of the warp gate itself, the mechanism of which lay within the warp. As they transmitted their findings to Dorn and the Phalanx, the gate opened, and out churned an unseen armada. Several dozen warships appeared, heading to bring death and destruction to the Imperial Fists fleet. Thor and Gigantes, tiny, insignificant, and nigh impossible to detect in their small craft, moved closer to the warp gate for a better look. Meanwhile, Dorn did what he did best: machinations and plans, strategies within strategies. Much to the confusion of his master of Huskarls, he baited the unseen fleet with a supposedly vulnerable fleet arrangement, and when the moment came, transmitted fleet orders to the other ships in order to pursue and confound the unseen's assault. In several moves, reversing the advantages that had so readily appeared to the enemy, Dorn, even in defense, considered attack. This was not merely a method to capture a warp gate in a single system. No. Dorn, as always, had greater plans. To learn more of the unseen, yes. They were still virtually an unknown enemy to the Imperium. Descended from humanity, yes. Cloaking technologies and travel capabilities completely different to the Emperor's realm. Dorn needed more. Were their gates finite in capacity? Where could they be? And more important than anything, where were their homeworlds located? Meanwhile, alone within their craft, Thor and Gigantes studied the gate. Viewed through the lens of the navigator's third eye, they could detect the 6 concentric circles, rotating, twisting, and forming a giant lock of sorts that allowed the gates to function. Even as they studied the phenomena, the gate began to unlock once more, more unseen ships waiting just beyond its boundary, ready to be expunged from the Netherrealm and join the fight against the Imperial Fists. Thor and Rigantis joined their minds together, willing the rings to physically hold in place, yet they were no match for the technologies of the Dark Age in sheer strength. Piece by rotating piece, the mechanisms fell into place and more warships began to exit the portal. In a moment of sheer desperation, Navigator Rigantis took the risk. Instead of allowing the Librarian to work his power through himself, Rigantis inverted his warp sight back at Thor. The psychic backlash rippled out like a storm, tearing them apart. Yet the psychic wave continued, and as the first ship was halfway out of the warp gate, it was knocked sideways by the incredible blast of power. Strong though the warp gate was, it was never designed to take the might of a ship halfway in real space crashing against its inner borders. It exploded violently, in a flash of colors that tore it asunder, collapsing the rift, slicing the ship in two, and igniting its severed reactor core. The Unseen would no longer have access to this warp gate. The Imperial Fists, stalwart as always, had triumphed through the most sluggish of campaigns until this point, facing every disadvantage along the way, forced into the smallest of warp jumps out there in the blackness of the Occluda Noctis, forever under attack from a guerrilla foe within its home territory. Now would be the moment where things changed. The knowledge of the warp gates and the subsequent investigation into them only aided the Imperial Fists' ways of waging war. They knew what to look for now, where it could be found. The Unseen could no longer rely on utter anonymity. Yet more was needed. Rogal Dorn knew this, and the enemy thought they knew the Imperium until now. They expected the slow advance, the lockstep of fleets marching together through the blackness. What they would never expect would be a lightning strike to the heart of their empire. Calculations, prognostications, star charts, and battle reports formed themselves within Rogal Dorn's mind. A brain far more powerful than a supercomputer, for it did not merely process data, but anticipated the enemy's needs. One system came to mind. Its location lay deep, deep into unseen territory. A capital world, most likely, perhaps even their home planet. It would be a risky strike, yet the benefits of ending the war were too great. The Unseen, reliant as they were on warp gates, would be able to react quickly to any strike. Yet in their confidence, they were likely to have made an error in judgment. For to them, the capital world would be far behind the front lines, not yet in any danger of the armies of the Imperium of Man. Rogal would prove them wrong. A single ship could make the warp jump quicker than any others. Coordinating fleets took time and caused ripples within the warp that could be read with much greater accuracy. Instead, he would take only the phalanx and capture their world before any resistance could be mustered. There, aboard the phalanx gathered 40,000 Imperial Fists. There would be no support ships or major transports. They would enter the fray with enough gunships and drop pods to release the legionaries in 3 mighty waves. A rare commitment of total strength to utterly dominate the Unseen in a way not seen in an age. Capture their empire by the throat and force capitulation. "20,000 legionaries launched in the first wave. Enough to conquer a city in an hour. Enough to annihilate a civilization within a day. Through the Unseen's defenses, they swept like a golden flood. From the tallest bastions to the deepest canals, Dorn's orders were simple. purge all unseen. It was not a mere victory Dorn required, but a message to be delivered. Where one capital world could fall, so could they all, and they would in time. Dorn gathered his sons about him, a mere 5 kilometers from the main stronghold on the planet in open view. He wished to be seen, to be spotted. The bodies of dozens of his own sons littered the landscape, dwarfed by the hundreds and thousands of unseen slaughtered during their advance. There, he made a final statement to the unseen, a challenge and declaration that they would know was by his hand and broadcast through all available channels to the enemy. I am Rogal Dorn, Primarch of the Emperor of Mankind. We have waged a long war, but the end has arrived and will be swift. We bear no ill will against those that agree to join the Imperium, but have no mercy for those that continue to resist. After I demonstrate the power of the Emperor, I will ask you only once more if you are willing to join with all of humankind. Do not choose unwisely. With his final words, the broadcasting hall within the phalanx hanging in orbit shivered with power. Gathered in that chamber were the astropaths of the fleet and the librarians of the Imperial Fists. Their powers coalesced and amplified into a single resonance within the broadcasting hall, and soundlessly were transmitted down towards the planet in a wave that began to spread. Down on the planet, the unseen began to die. The psychic wave, unleashed by the combined powers of the astropathic choir and librarius, forced the unseen to immediately announce their capitulation. How could they not? Their peculiar reaction to psychic contact, which had earlier so unwittingly led to the death of one of the unseen prisoners, was now exploited to its fullest. Members of the unseen's population fell like wheat before a scythe, dropping where they stood in near instantaneous death. Thus did the senators announce an immediate, unconditional ceasefire. A decisive victory, the first domino to topple that would bring about the end of the Capiculu continuum, and the beginning of reintegration into the Imperium of Mankind. Not to mention the vast potential of technologies to be shared. These warp gates seemed to suffer no ill effects of the warp, while allowing incredibly quick short-distance travel. If the Imperium could harness the creation and maintenance of these warp gates, it could change a great deal for the future of the Imperium of Mankind. So it was that Rogal asked the Capiculu of their implants, those psychic bonds that had triggered so easily when confronted with psychic intrusion. Were they the key to the secret of the warp ways? Was it an artificial implantation that brought them better cohesion with their technologies? Then, the Capiculu spoke of their genesis. For these mind bonds, these psychic strands, were no mere implant. They were grown within them. The Capiculu had once been chattel slaves to a race known as the Regency of Doeth for over a millennia. This in itself was nothing surprising. The vast amount of colonies across the galaxy had, at one point or another, suffered beneath the hands of various Xenos after the dark age of technology passed, and the sundering of warp travel isolated them amidst the midnight black. However, the Regency of Doeth were powerful, technologically advanced Xenos. Their ships moved by their thoughts alone. The humans, the Capiculu's ancestors, had worked, toiled, and laboured for their enslavers' whims. Thus were they altered, not in order to better perform their tasks, but so that they might hear their masters' demands, act as they wished, perform their labours for them. and the mind bonds were their leash, their psychic shackles that had bound them tighter than whips and guns. Yet, humanity is, and always has been, a stubborn race. The Regency of Doeth could not keep the Capiculu from liberty no matter their technologies. After the Capiculu rebelled and had fled from their enslavers, they continued the legacy of their Capiculu forefathers. The mind bonds born within them as infants, growing and dying with them. It was these genetically altered bonds that allowed them access to the warpways. Even if it were possible, the Capiculu would never allow themselves to have the mind bonds removed, for it was both a part of their culture and identity, and in removing such genetic enhancements, their technologies would become defunct. Dorn digested this new information. The Emperor had been strict with his wording to his son before the onset of the Night Crusade. "Remove this hidden foe," he had stated. The Capiculu would never relinquish their mind bonds, even if such a thing were possible. To continue to allow them their technologies would be to leave a wickedly strong potential foe. Anything less than full integration with the existing Imperium would put billions of lives in jeopardy. Yet there was one more thing to consider. Far beyond any of his other gifts, Rogal Dorn was peerless amongst his brothers for one thing. Rogal Dorn did not do what he thought was best, nor did he perform acts for glory or acclaim. He, ever the unyielding fist of the Emperor, did as he was instructed. Without regard for alteration or modification, he was an extension of his father. "Remove this hidden foe," the Emperor had stated, and he had trusted this statement with Dorn, ever the most trusted of the Emperor's sons. Rogal Dorn spoke his judgment, and in doing so felt nothing, for duty was his calling, and guilt could find no place upon this Primarch, the extension of the Emperor's right hand. "Compliance is for human worlds. The Capiculu are no longer human." Chilling words that I will never be able to do justice with my tenor, but nevertheless I loved the story in this one. The brutal, uncompromising nature that the Imperium exhibits sometimes, alongside the rivalry and challenges that come from forcing warlord brothers to work together. Of course, I highly recommend checking out the book Rogal Dorn, the Emperor's Crusader, so you can enjoy it for yourself. But I hope I managed to enlighten those of you who haven't had the chance. Now, apologies for the voice, I finally managed to kick that nasty nicotine habit, so everything feels rather new around my voice box, but hopefully things will only improve. With that said, I do hope you enjoyed this escapism from reality. Do like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notifications button, and I'll see you next time.